Welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio, where truth equals reality, and truth is often stranger than fiction. Welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio, where truth equals reality, and truth is often stranger than fiction.
Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio. This is your host, Royce the Redneck Radio Man. And I just played my intro, and I didn't hear it, so I don't know. I played it before the show, and I heard it fine, so I don't know what happened with that, guys. But I'm going to go ahead and start without it. And tonight I've got Sean Blackwell returning. And we're finishing what we started last Tuesday when I had to end the show early to take my son to ER, which he's doing much better now. But I brought him back so we could finish up what I didn't have time to finish up with the last time. And he was very gracious about the whole thing, and I really do appreciate him. And can y'all hold on for just 1 second? Okay, I do apologize for that slight interruption, but at any rate, I was going to say before we get started into this too far, if y'all are interested in learning more about Sean Blackwell, he's the author of Am I Bipolar or Just Waking Up? And his website is www.bipolarorwakingup.com. You can purchase his book at Amazon. And I really request people, if you can, to either click to it, the link on his site to it, or right here on my site, since I do get a commission on, the affiliate program at Amazon, to get over there to buy it. And it's the same price as if you went there direct. Either way, this here will be put in the archives probably tomorrow or the next day, where it'll stay, accessible, so I can move the next show up and have it ready. And if y'all want to come listen to the show here, in case you're listening at YouTube or iTunes or somewhere, the address is www.paranormalpalace.com. And if y'all would like to call in, the number is 832-632-7904. So, Sean, how are you doing today?
Pretty good, Royce. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing pretty good. I'm doing a little bit better, I think, than I was the other night. Thank you for coming back, and I really appreciate your understanding.
Yeah, and can I just add one thing to your introduction there?
Yes, please.
Along with the website, excuse me, now I've got the cough. Most people are familiar with my work from YouTube channel Bipolar or Waking Up, where I've got about 40 videos on this subject alone, just on the subject of bipolar disorder or other mental disorders, or at least that label being associated with spiritual experiences, mystical experiences, and the capacity to recover from those experiences.
Okay, yeah, and I'm glad you did mention that, because I went over there and saw some of those videos, and I think it's well worth the visit, and it's very informative, and everybody can see you face to face while you talk to them.
Mm-hmm. And it's Bipolar or Waking Up, all one word, too. No spaces.
Okay. Now, last time we were talking, we were discussing the hero's journey that we both just happened to be familiar with. Would you like to tell the listeners a little something about the listener's journey? I mean, the hero's journey. Where did I slap myself in the face?
Well, sure. The hero's journey is an idea or a concept that was discovered by theologian Joseph Campbell in a book. The first time he mentioned it, I think, was in a book from 1949 called The Hero with a Thousand Faces. And what Joseph Campbell discovered, looking at the world's mythology, is that everywhere you go in the world, across all cultures, you see the same myth. You see the myth of the hero's journey. And what that myth involves is a person who's not really sort of satisfied with their life, and they feel this calling. Some sort of quest is sort of inviting them, or maybe some creature, some strange creature, or something is motivating them to leave their normal circumstances. And what happens is, at first they don't want to go, they resist it normally, but then in the end they feel like they just have to go on this adventure, like it becomes a matter of life and death. And on this adventure, they overcome a number of obstacles that really challenge them and especially challenge their character until they finally achieve some goal or conquer some mission, like, for example, slaying a dragon. But along that journey, they discover a lot about themselves. And so when they come back to their normal life, it takes them a while to get adjusted to that normal life again. And what they find is that they can't live the way they used to live in their normal everyday life. They need to change their circumstances. And so they start to integrate themselves back into their regular life again, except this time they're being more forceful, changing things in their world, and in that process helping the world around them grow. So they in that way they bring a gift back from their adventure, is that they bring a gift back to their own society, and that's part of the integration process. Okay, so that's the hero's journey from Joseph Campbell's standpoint. Now the interesting part is that in the 1980s, there was a few radical psychiatrists at the time, and one was named Dr. John Perry. And he had a clinic where he was healing people with acute schizophrenia without using medications. And how he was doing it was he was allowing people to enter into their process when they were prepared to enter. Let me just qualify that if a person was very frightened and that they were accusing other people of causing the experience, that's not somebody that John Weir Perry would work with. But when the person sort of saw their process as potentially beneficial, even if it was a psychosis, then he would support that. And after a few days, this person would start to return to normal. Now, John Weir Perry knew Joseph Campbell and invited Joseph Campbell to his clinic. And he explained to Joseph Campbell what he saw happening in terms of how people entered into this non-ordinary state, this other world. And they seemed to go through quite a heroic process, an adventurous process in this non-ordinary state. And then they returned not only better, or not only they recovered, but they returned with a new outlook on life. They were refreshed. They felt reborn in many situations. And they started to live their life in a whole new way. And that's very much how I live my life. After my psychosis, I started to live my life in a whole new way, unmedicated. And I'm very grateful for my experience in the hospital. And now, at this point, going back to John Weir Perry and Joseph Campbell, when Perry explained to Campbell what he saw happening in the clinic, Joseph Campbell said, well, this is the hero's journey. These people are, when people go into psychosis, they are psychologically entering into a mythological world. And that mythological world can include angels and demons and different sort of psychological adventures that you're putting yourself in this non-ordinary state. And if you're able to work through that, then it's possible to heal and have a breakthrough. And that's why my title, my website, and my book is like, am I bipolar or am I waking up? Because I really saw my own process as a period of enlightenment, but enlightenment with a small e. I didn't become an ultimate Buddha or anything, but it ended 4 years of depression.
Wow.
Yeah.
That bespeaks a whole lot in itself. And, while you were speaking, what I was thinking about was John in the book of Revelation. It sounded like like when he wrote that book, he was in the middle of one of these psychoses or hero's journey while he was writing.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned the Bible because, the Bible is really full of stories, especially in the Old Testament, of people having hallucinations, having visions of God. And, Noah built the ark after, hearing a voice from God, and he tried to turn it down, and then eventually he built the ark, I don't know if Noah is a historical fact or it's a myth, but the Bible is full of stories like that. The book of Ezekiel has been studied by psychiatrists, and many of those psychiatrists have made the argument that Ezekiel from the Old Testament was actually schizophrenic, But from one particular thinker named Julian Jaynes from the 1970s believes that with people from ancient times, visions and voices or hallucinations, what would be called schizophrenia today, were actually part of their daily life. I mean, that prophets and seers were well known, and that often what they had to say started religions or started religious movements or moved society as a whole in a positive direction.
which would make a lot of sense. This is the same point that Seth was making in his book, The Gift of Spiritual Madness. And, to be honest with you, like you said, I think it was David in the Bible was thought to be, in a psychosis event when he ran naked and before the Lord, was it in his underwear? Something like that?
I don't know if they had underwear in those days, but...
or loincloth or whatever he was doing, but,
yeah.
They mentioned, is this man like a prophet also, when he was running naked? Like it was a common thing for prophets to do, in other words. Yeah,
it seems that in ancient times they had more of a space for and a recognition that people in non-ordinary states were in some sort of contact with the spirit world. That is quite a common thing. And if anybody out there has seen the movie The 300, there's this it's the movie about Sparta, and the king or the main ruler goes up and he visits the oracle. And back in Greece, the government could not make a decision without first consulting their oracles, and the oracles were generally young girls with no education at all that were thought to be mediums. And imagine Barack Obama. He can't make a single decision until he's consulted with an illiterate 14-year-old girl who's in a non-ordinary state of consciousness. We'd have quite a society, but that just shows the level of respect that ancient Greece had for these kind of mediums.
And you got to also remember now, Greeks back in those days, like say at the turn of the century back then, were more Hellenistic, and I think they still are to this day. At least it seems to me like they are. Than they were like the Orthodox, in other words, which left them, I think, more open to spiritual experiences.
Okay, yeah, it could be. It does seem that. For example, if you look around at tribal cultures around the world, and I'm not saying that tribal cultures are better, and in some ways they're a lot worse than the way we live today, but pretty much all tribal cultures have space for people to enter into non-ordinary states, and they do see it as potentially beneficial, but they can also see it as potentially dangerous too. That's something that sometimes people forget.
Well, yeah, because I imagine while you're in this here state, as a matter of fact, I think it was Joseph Campbell, who you mentioned earlier, is the one that said the difference between the mystic and the psychotic is one of them swimming, the other one's drowning, pretty much.
Yeah, that's about what he said, and he said that after meeting Dr. John Weir Perry and visiting his clinic. And he could see that at the clinic. What Joseph Campbell didn't say in that quote is that, okay, the mystic is swimming in the ocean of the unconscious, the schizophrenic is drowning, but the question becomes, can you rescue somebody from drowning? And what we're starting to see is that given the right education and the right support, yes, at clinics like Dr. John Weir Perry's clinic, people could be rescued from drowning, people who did not have the tools to heal themselves. With loving support, yeah, it was possible for them to heal.
Well, another question might have been, how possible was it during the days that Joseph Campbell was alive, because we were not as advanced then as we are now, and spirituality teaching was really just back on the rise from the Dark Ages, wouldn't you think?
Well, there's a little more space in. It's kind of complicated because. For example, back 100 years ago, you would say that more people were more of a religious mindset,
Right.
And whatever their religion said is the way things went. And a lot of the time, people with mental disorders got labeled as having an evil spirit or they need to have an exorcism or something like that. And looking back, that's not particularly helpful. And it doesn't seem to be, a particularly helpful thing. But then with psychiatry, which is so-called modern times, they're putting chemicals into people's brains that cause brain damage, and they don't offer any cure. So the modern world really hasn't offered a solution that's that much better than what the religious world offers.
I would agree. I mean, as far as psychiatry and religion in the modern world. But what I was really more thinking about was, there are groups of like Gnostics and Masons and, you know, other people that are more spiritually minded that's gotten away from the religion of science or religion itself that I think are probably, and like, what's it called? The Madness Group or I'm probably getting it wrong and I don't mean no insult by it. The group that,
Mad Pride?
supports. Mad Pride movement, yes.
Mad
that's the one.
Pride.
Yeah. Movements like that we didn't have back then is what I was thinking about.
And in my book, I talked about it. You know, I was up 10 years ago. I was in Salvador, Brazil, and my wife and I went up to what's called a Candomblé ceremony, Candomblé. And it's a little bit like Haitian voodoo. It's an African religion. And what the people do up there in the favelas, the slum mountains, Salvador is surrounded by mountains. And when you go up, it's sort of like slum areas, very poor areas. A lot of people living up there. There's no running water and stuff like that. But they have their religious ceremonies. And when you're up there, you can see people entering into trance. And it became very clear to me that, you know, these people, they were not there. And I wrote about it in my book that I felt like, well, if I had been able to be taken care of in my experience by these people who are more comfortable with non-ordinary states of consciousness like trance, probably it would have been better than being in the psychiatric hospital, which was it's, you know, for anybody who's been there, most of the time it's quite a negative experience. It's not, you're kind of treated like, there's two options. You're treated like either you're not human, like you're not even there. They talk around you, they don't connect with you, or they're just mean to you, where they act like you're a criminal, like you're just a problem that needs to be solved. You know, that's not everybody's experience, but it's quite common.
Yeah, I think I would tend to agree with you. I've seen these places, and I was even in them when I was younger myself, but not for the same thing. But, yeah, and you make a very valid point on that. But one of the things I wanted to come back to before I forgot was talking about psychosis versus the mystic, in other words. We approached it from the mythology angle, but are there any other angles that you'd like to cover on that?
Well, I think I'd like to give people a little bit of history of where the thinking is coming from, maybe. And it really did start in the 1960s with a radical psychiatrist named R.D. Laing, who started to see that, hey, you know what, these people who have these so-called mental disorders, schizophrenia, they seem to have this very spiritual side as well, that they can say things, they seem to have sometimes even telepathic powers in some situations, and they do have this mystic connection, and he was the first. But then in the 80s, there was a doctor named Dr. Stanislav Grof, and he was really the first person who put out the idea there that sometimes in life people have spiritual experiences that seem to open themselves up to a broader world, and they're easy to manage. Like maybe you're going along and all of a sudden you feel like you see some white light, like you're on a mountainside and it feels like the sky opens up to you and you feel elated in a state of ecstasy, you know, and that could renew your sense of faith in the world. And that, if that's easy to integrate, we would call that a spiritual emergence. Like maybe you had this moment on a mountainside and you go home and you tell people about it and you're fine, you go back to work the next day. But in my case, the experience was so big that I thought I died, right? And so all of a sudden I've taken a break with reality and I'm in a delusion and I'm taking my clothes off in a hotel ballroom and the police are coming to get me. And now I'm into the world of mental disorder, you know, that's a different thing. But what Grof would say is that, when you have a person who's having these profound spiritual states, but that they lose control, he would call that a spiritual emergency. Okay. Now, during the 1980s and 90s, my thinking, based on Grof's work, was that a spiritual emergency and a psychosis was quite different, that these were two separate things. I didn't think what I had was a mental disorder at all. But what I've learned since 2007 with the experiences of my nieces that I talked about last week is that there's a lot of overlap, and that when people, if you look at people's experiences, some people have very spiritual experiences that I did, and they tend to be easier to get through. But other people have very dark and disturbing experiences, it can lead to violence. It can be dangerous. People can try and commit suicide. Usually these experiences are full of paranoia. They're often, and they are spiritual, but in a demonic sort of way. Like these people are seeing devils, that's quite a common thing. And so you need to be careful because that situation can be quite dangerous, okay? But Royce, here's the funny thing is how do you separate one from the other? Because many times the experiences sort of overlap. And I would say most of the people I've talked to online, and I've talked to over 1,000 people with bipolar disorder, the experiences are that some moments are beautiful and ecstatic and wonderful and they've got new insights into life. And then other moments are a little bit paranoid, a little bit demonic. People feel like everybody's out to get them and things like that. And so between those two ends of the spectrum, between heaven and hell, there's this big range in the middle that most people seem to fall into. And they're the people that need the most support and the most help,
Now, you mentioned you spoke to thousands of people on the Internet. Out of these people, would you say the majority of them would agree with you that this is more of a spiritual awakening than a psychosis?
Well, the people that contact me, yes, but you've got to remember that most of the people that contact me they've watched my videos, they like my videos, and so when they write me or contact me, it's in a very affirmative, positive, supportive way, okay? But there's a lot of people out there that do not like my videos. They think what I'm doing is dangerous. They insist on the psychiatric model for taking care of this problem. And so, believe me, Royce, I've got some enemies out there.
Oh, I do believe you.
I got some people who do not like my work.
I happen to have one of the listeners, the first time Seth come on, that is a lady I've known for years in a Yahoo group that has always been so nice. But boy, and she's never attended one of my shows, but this one time she did. And she started in chat on Seth, was very much upset. Her husband evidently had been diagnosed with bipolar. She was dead set. He could not handle it without the medicine. Pardon me, hang on just 1 minute.
Mm-hmm.
I had an itchy throat. But anyway, evidently, she was really worried that Seth's message and your message, which matches, was a dangerous message, like you're saying, because people wouldn't take their meds and they would flip out and something bad would happen, in other words. And she didn't have an open mind. So, yeah, it's kind of like what you're describing already.
Yeah, and I'll be honest, there are people that have watched my videos, a few of my videos, and they've gone into a crisis afterwards because they decided to stop the medication. And I feel bad about that. I really do. But there's other people who have stopped their medication and have done quite well without it and have been able to work through. But I've got to ask myself, I've got to say, if that's happening at this point in time, what's the reason that I'm doing this? I can't really say for sure that I've helped more people than maybe even I've hurt at this point. To be blunt, Royce, I really can't say. But I do know when I look in the mirror at night that I'm speaking the truth, my truth, certainly my version of the truth. It might not be true for somebody else. They might not believe me, and that's okay. But you've got to speak your truth in this world, and I really believe that as long as I can look at myself in the mirror at night, and I know I'm sharing something that's new and controversial. And at this point, potentially dangerous, mainly because we don't have a cultural understanding of what's happening. But I can sleep at night with my work, Well, some things have happened, but I can definitely sleep at night, and I know I'm doing the right thing down the road,
Well, I'll be honest with you. From my perspective, I would look at it this way. If you choose to say something, there may be some that will not be able to handle going off their medicine or may not be able to handle it right then. Maybe it's a lack of faith. Maybe they're one of the drowners that Joseph Campbell talked about and they need more help. There may be some that it will help. If you come out and bring in your message, you may help some of them. If you do not bring your message, you will not help any of them. And there's going to be a certain percentage, whether you bring the message or not, that's still going to fall by the wayside due to the medicine system, and they commit suicide. So I think in the end, you stand to do more good than bad if you look at it, all the way through, in other words.
I hope so. And, there's a lawyer up there in Alaska, Jim Gottstein, I heard him on, I think Mind Freedom with David Oakes. David Oakes was Mind Freedom. They were doing a radio show. And he's looked at research that says that, some people, when they start medications in their 20s, a lot of these people die 25 years younger than average. Like, people are, dying in their mid-50s that would normally live until they're in their 80s, And I just think that's a real sad thing, that, and it's not just suicide, some of it is suicide, but it's, the health problems that come with the medications, the long-term research shows that people gradually get worse. It's like a long, slow decline. And so, I just think we got to start looking at things a different way. But since we're in what I consider to be a transition moment, most of the time I don't recommend people stop their medications. And if they do stop, that they do it extremely slowly and that they're very prepared. And one thing that they can do to be very prepared is to watch all of my videos in sequence, because that can psychologically prepare you, for what needs to happen or for what will happen to you if you go into a non-ordinary state. And there's a very important book put out by the Icarus Project that I mentioned last time I was here on reducing your medications, in a safer way. Okay.
Right. A little bit at a time.
To mention. Yeah. You should never cut your medication by more than 20% at a time. And in my opinion, you need to have a supportive person with you that has some idea of what you're trying to do. And that hospitalization may happen. You may get yourself hospitalized again. We don't have a supportive culture for this experience. And that's what I'm trying to do, trying to create a more supportive culture. Okay?
Well, I think also some of these people coming off the meds that have a bad experience might have a bigger success rate if they had something similar to a detox tank, not the exact, but I'm talking about in principle here, where they can go, be put in a area of safety where they can't harm themselves or anyone else until they're through the withdrawal period, in other words.
Absolutely. And it's my hope that next year my wife and I can move to a house where we've got some space to help one or two people, maybe probably just one or two at a time down here in Brazil. And we want to create a room where, it's really safe for them,
So that could be kind of dangerous for you too if you're not careful, though, couldn't it?
There's risks, but I've talked to enough people online now that I feel like I know the kind of people that I would want to work with, and I think that there's a way to minimize the risk. I think there's a way to minimize it, and also, I really do feel like I'm doing, whatever you want to call God. You can call God by anything, but I feel like I'm doing the work of that universal spirit. And when I've got someone in front of me, there's a really strong feeling of yes or no. Like, is this the person I want to work with, or no? This isn't the person for me. He's not stabilized. He's too dangerous. I got a cold feeling about this guy, and no, I don't want to work with him. But every once in a while, a guy comes along, and it could be a good thing.
Slips under your radar.
Yeah, no. Someone comes along and says, "Hey, I want to work with this guy," like that.
Well, so, I think it's a good thing that you want to work with people. I mean, if nobody tried to work with them, where would anybody be? There'd be no help.
Yeah.
And for you, pardon me, I could be wrong, but I think it's kind of personal, not in a negative way, but, inspired by your own experience.
Mm-hmm.
Would I be very far off?
Oh, what? I wouldn't be doing this, if it didn't happen to me and it didn't happen to my nieces, And I was telling, I've got, we've worked with two of our nieces, and the younger one, we really didn't have the opportunity to work with her early, and psychiatry got involved, and it got to be a bit of a mess. And she's still medicated. She's been medicated for 5 years. And her older sister, though, came to us directly, and we worked her through our first acute psychosis, in our own apartment. And it was quite deep and profound, but it's 5 years later, and she's doing her master's degree on a full scholarship from the government of France. She's in Paris doing her master's degree, And, it just shows you, I mean, if she were medicated, for the last 5 years, I don't think she would have been sharp enough to win that scholarship, for example, because it's not that the medications really drag you down, but to win a scholarship at one of the top universities in the world, you've really got to be on your game, And we were just really proud that was able to happen, and we know that part of the reason she's there right now is because she came to us first, And now the other thing is that her sister, everything takes its time, and her sister she's getting a little more assertive about wanting to work with us. She's 22 now. She's a little bit older. But because she's been medicated for 5 years, we're going to take it very slowly with her. And we actually want to live together. That's the idea. Is she's living with her parents right now, and I want to move to the interior of Brazil to have a house where we can work with her on a daily basis. And that's the idea anyways.
Well,
Hopefully
given the
we'll
fact of what y'all be working with, you'd need her probably close at hand anyway. I mean, things could get very unexpected, right?
Sure, and even things like we need to be within a half an hour of a hospital, So we want a lot of privacy. We want to be in sort of the countryside, but we need to be within a half an hour of a hospital in case something happens and we need to take her to psychiatric emergency. There's a need for psychiatry in the whole picture, and sometimes if people get paranoid and they get violent, there's nothing else you can do. You need to protect them. You need to protect yourself. So it's not an easy path, Royce.
No, I think I would tend to agree with you. I mean, there's a whole big, huge gray area here that you're swimming in, trying to find the right shade of gray.
Yeah, pretty much.
Like I say, I've never had the actual experience myself, but, there's a lot of people who have had it. It seems to be more common now, at least the diagnosis that, is than it was like 100 years ago. But do you think there's a lot of these people that are maybe not even, let's say they're perhaps antisocial or sociopath rather than really being a bipolar or schizophrenic? Do you ever think there's been any cases where that kind of mix-up could occur?
Well, I do think that when it comes to hypomania, which is extreme highs, like being very emotional and very depressed, that some people can get misdiagnosed. And for example, I met one girl who told me that she was feeling a bit depressed, and she went to a psychiatrist, and she was in there for 10 minutes. And she said, I've been feeling quite depressed lately. And he just said, you're bipolar. Here's your medication. I mean, that's ridiculous, right? And I think especially because, I don't think this is a big stereotype, but you need to live under a rock if you don't know that women are more emotional than men. And I think that especially women wind up over-medicated because they are more emotional. They do have more highs and they do have more lows. But that, simply being a woman is being medicated now. Okay? So there is that over-medication aspect. But on the other side, there is also a big increase in people entering into non-ordinary states where they think they're Jesus, they think they've died, they think the FBI's after them, all these sorts of experiences. But more of them I believe we're getting more of them on a spiritual, more positive experience now. Just because of I think really because of the moment we're in culturally, There's a lot of factors that really go into it. Maybe too much to get into right now, But it's increased tremendously in the last 15 years. Robert Whitaker wrote a book called Anatomy of an Epidemic because the numbers of people with so-called mental disorders is just skyrocketing.
Oh God, it's astronomical.
Yeah, and New York Times wrote they did a survey from 1993 to 2003. And in that 10-year period, there was a 4,000% increase in the diagnosis of bipolar disorder for people, I think, under the age of 21. 4,000%. So how could that be genetic if it's a 4,000% increase? Because genes don't change that fast, you see?
No, they don't. Plus the fact that why is it they started coming out of the woodwork, genes or no genes? I mean, that was a pretty astronomical event over a very short period of time. And you have to ask yourself, nothing else seems to do this. Why does this do it?
Yeah. Like people aren't getting cancer at 4,000% increase, or having heart attacks, like 4,000% increase in heart attacks. But I think there's a lot to it. There is a strong drug aspect. People using illegal substances. Most of the people that contact me have been smoking marijuana quite a bit. But it's more complex because it's like they have a little bit of family problems at home, and then to sort of make themselves feel better, one of their coping strategies is they smoke marijuana. Maybe they drink, or maybe they're using harder drugs. And then that combination of difficult childhood plus drugs, marijuana, LSD, then causes their crisis, you see. So it's a little bit more complex. And one of the other things is sometimes people enter psychosis just from being exposed to new ideas, like going to university and learning about ideas that are completely different from your own culture. I mean, that's enough to break you out, you know, like mine was at a self-help seminar, you know. Who expected that?
Right. And, you know, when you keep mentioning about, you know, this psychosis, the thing that keeps coming back to my mind time and time again as the multiverse theory, I mean, you know, if you're slipping in and out of different universes, or your mind or your soul is, your psyche, that could explain a whole lot.
You know, it's funny you mentioned that. You mean like parallel universe theory?
Right.
Parallel universe? Because there's a doctor, Dr. Paris Williams, who wrote a book called Rethinking Madness. And in that book, he gives 6 case studies of people who have healed completely from what was diagnosed as long-term schizophrenia. And these people have been healed for more than 10 years without any symptoms. Every case study in his book. And every single one of them mentioned the theory of parallel universe as something that they considered when they were in their non-ordinary states, you know, like this idea that there's like different Royces and different Seans, and at every moment we're sort of choosing the universe that we want to be in depending on our tone, depending on the moral decisions we make, you know?
And sometimes maybe things that happen in our life might just literally scare us out of this one.
Yeah, and you know, another possibility, and this came up with John Weir Perry, the guy who had the clinic, is he really saw, you know, these experiences as a self-fulfilling prophecy, where if you think a person's mentally ill, if you think that they need medication for life, and they believe it, that's the way their life's going to be. It's like that's one universe. If you think that this could be a powerful transformative process, that they need to work through their experience, but if you support them and continue to give them, you know, love and protection, then they'll heal. And that's another universe, you know. So depending on your perspective, depends on which universe you wind up in.
I've read that before somewhere, and I think there really could be a lot of merit to that. I mean, today we could be in a world where, say, the ticket coming to Christ is imminent. Tomorrow, it may seem like it's already happened or be a long way down the road because something in our belief system changed, no matter what those around us did.
Yeah. I mean,
it sounds kind of freaky, but you know, the mind, I think, can do some freaky things.
Yeah, it seems like, you know, every time you push back the curtain on life, you know, you think, well, what's behind this curtain? And you push that curtain back, you know what you find? You find another curtain. You just keep going, you know, and every time you pull a curtain back, the world gets a little bigger, a little wilder, a little more interesting, a little scarier, you know. So, you know, for anybody out there who thinks they have a boring life, I would say
you may not have as boring a one as you think.
Yeah, just rethink the way you're doing things. Take a few chances, you know, because my life, you know, I was bored out of my mind when I was 29 years old. And when I turned 30, I was in the psychiatric hospital, largely because of my boredom. I think part of it was I just didn't find life particularly interesting. But man, after the hospitalization and I got out, I went to Peru, I traveled Brazil, I got a much better job, met an amazing woman, and we've been together since that time. And now we're looking at, opening one of the first clinics in the world. That's our dream anyways, to help people with this condition. And, life has been nothing but interesting since that time.
Yeah, I think a lot of that does go back to what are you doing to make your life interesting?
Yeah, I think a lot of times, especially these days, people don't trust themselves because they think, well, I want to do this, but rationally, like, how am I going to have the money to do that? Like, they think, oh, I hate my job and I can't quit my job. I want to travel, but I don't have the money. There's a lot of focus on safety and security. Do you have insurance? Things like that. And sometimes when it's just killing you, when you just feel like you got to do something, you just got to go and do it,
Now, one of the things that we mentioned last week, and I really wasn't prepared, didn't have the location where I'd read it at. If you don't mind, I'd like to share it real quick. Sure. That thing I told you about, an ancient teaching that I'd read somewhere online about those on the spiritual path. They will first be scared, and then they'll marvel. Which the place I found that those weren't the words that were used. But I did find it again. It was in the Gospel of Thomas, Sayings 2, which is part of the Nag Hammadi Library. And Jesus said, "He who seeks, let him not cease, seeking until he finds. And when he finds, he will be troubled. And when he is troubled, he will be amazed, and he will reign over all." That was what I was trying to think of and find the location of last week, and since I never did, I just wanted to get that out real quick. I hope you don't mind.
Yeah, well, it's interesting you brought up the Gospel of Thomas because, that's not Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John there, That's a text that was discovered about 100 years ago in Egypt, I think, but it's been validated as a valid gospel of teachings of Jesus that was apparently suppressed by the church. They didn't allow it to come forward. And I've read a little bit about it, and there's a famous quote as well, another one from that Gospel of Thomas that sort of goes along the same path. I just want to look it up here for a second.
But if you ask me, that verse I just quoted from Thomas kind of describes what we're talking about.
Yeah, it does. They had another one as well that was, I can't find the quote, but it's like, oh, here it is. If you don't, oh, here it is. Okay. Sorry, I've got my Google. I'm Googling just like everybody else. Just waiting for it to come up. If you don't bring forth what is inside you, what you don't bring forth will destroy you. Okay?
I've heard of that.
Yeah. And, that's in the Gospel of Thomas. And it's in the Gospel of Thomas. And when you think about what's happening in psychosis, that's exactly what's happening in psychosis. And I don't like to use the word psychosis because that implies a pathology and illness. But once you go into that non-ordinary state, if you don't really get in touch with what's inside you, it will destroy you. You need to connect with that energy. Yeah.
Yeah, and, I brought that up because it was really confirmation for what you were saying, prior. In other words, about the, I lost my place there for a second, but it did basically confirm what you were saying about the, the psychosis in the other, and what we were talking about the mystic and the psychotic, in other words. So I thought since it was confirmation, what you were saying about the fact that this is, in ancient times, it was common. That's what I was trying to think of. That shows that a script that's some 2,000 years old is dealing with it, in other words. So, yeah, this goes back to ancient times, in other words.
Yes, and although I don't think as common as it is today. I really think it's more common now. And I know you're in Houston, right?
Yes, sir.
You're in Houston. I think that there could be a lot of, you're sort of in the Bible Belt down there.
Yeah.
And, I should say, yeah, I should say up there because I'm in Brazil, right? So up in Houston, you're in the Bible Belt, and I think that sometimes it's difficult for Christians to hear that people are having these sort of spiritual experiences, because it really doesn't fit into conventional Christianity. But if you look at a book like, it's called Mysticism, and it was written by a woman named Evelyn Underhill about 100 years ago, but it's still quite a popular book. You can find it on Amazon.com. It's a difficult book to read because it was written 100 years ago, but she traces the spiritual experiences of the saints, St. Thomas of Assisi, St. John of the Cross, St. Teresa de Avila, and talks about the experiences that they had. And when you read those experiences, they sound exactly like what many people today are going through. Really. You'd be surprised.
Actually, I wouldn't be surprised at all. But, the funny thing you mentioned about people in the Bible Belt having trouble grasping it, me being a preacher's kid and an ex-Sunday school teacher, if I hadn't gotten away from the religious end and into more of the alchemy and the spiritual end, I would have probably had the same trouble myself.
Mm-hmm. But, as long as you can accept the idea that, there's a spark of God within you, and pretty much every mystic tradition believes that. If you believe that there's something God-like, some spiritual thing is within you, then I don't think it's so tough to accept that, hey, maybe you can have a spiritual problem. You can have a spiritual issue that could make you a little bit crazy every once in a while,
Oh, I'm quite sure that you really can, even if I haven't experienced it myself. Like you said, it's common amongst people that don't bring out forth or don't walk in the Spirit or work with the Spirit. And maybe I'll just work with the Spirit a little more, or try to, in my life, and some others do. Might be why I, escaped it, in other words.
Yeah, could be.
Could be it's yet to come.
Yeah. And there's another term I was mentioning to you before the show, which is Kundalini.
Thank you. I was just trying to remember what that other was that we were talking about. I could ask you about, and I thought I almost had it. And now you brought it up, so thanks. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, I haven't done a video on Kundalini, but a lot of people online have written me and said, Sean, when are you going to do a video on Kundalini? Apparently, this whole concept of a Kundalini awakening is becoming quite common in the United States. People seem to be talking about this. And for those of you who don't know, a lot more people have maybe heard of the chakra system, these 7 sort of wheels of energy that, from Hindu traditions and in traditions in India are supposed to be in your body, they're the center of a whole bioenergetic system, the chakra system. And the Kundalini energy is related to that chakra system. And the Hindu mystics saw that when they had meditated for many years, that they would start to get this energy shooting up their back. And sometimes it would be quite painful, and sometimes it would be very difficult. So in the Hindu tradition, for these yogis who meditate for years, they would always tell the yogis that if you want to follow that path, that spiritual path, that you must have a master, because if you don't know what you're doing, you can hit these Kundalini energies and they can make you crazy, you see. And what we're seeing now, and just I think what the saints were going through and what these gurus in India were going through, is this Kundalini energy really activated. And some people could think of it as, like I said, the chakra system. In China, they call it Qi. You could think of it as your soul system, or even bioenergy, or astral body, or subtle body. These are different names people have for it. It's like this sort of body of energy that we carry with us along with our physical body. And it's my belief that everything that's happening with regards to schizophrenia and bipolar disorder is happening on that level. And that if we can work with people on that level, we can heal these disorders.
Which that makes a lot of sense to me. And I think to me what it sounds like, and I could be wrong, is when you're coming into this Kundalini experience, or after you have it, you might be sort of, at least with some people, kind of walking in more than one reality at a time, or on the verge of slipping through more than one reality at a time.
Well, as John Perry said, he said that when someone's in an acute psychosis, they think they're dreaming. They're awake, but they're in a dream world, So one thing that happened with my niece is the family, I wasn't there to help her this time. It was the younger niece, and she was at a family get together near the beach, and she just walked into a hotel alone and jumped into the swimming pool with all her clothes on, and she just jumped in the pool of this, fancy hotel. And afterwards I asked her, I said, what happened? Why did you jump in? And she said, she thought she was dreaming, She didn't realize there would be implications for jumping into the pool,
So she was definitely not exactly completely in one. And, I'm pretty sure, because I've heard tell also stories of near-death experiences where people will, almost die, and they'll come back, like you say, only not from schizophrenia or a bipolar episode, but they'll still come back with a changed life, in other words, and they'll be in a different reality.
Sure. What the two things have in common is that often at play is what we'll call an ego death. And what that means is that in your daily life, Eckhart Tolle explains this quite well in his book, The Power of Now. You've got this false self, this image of who you are that sort of separates you from everything else. And that's your ego. And it's there to protect you, it's there to tell you when to pay your bills and stay out of traffic and what your name is and all that stuff. It's sort of all embedded in this energetic ego system. But that, when you have a near-death experience, that ego can disappear. And by the time you come back, you're seeing things differently because your energetic system has sort of broken down and shifted itself, and that happens to people in psychosis. They first have this sort of drop of their ego. They don't really know where they are, but then they sort of choose to move on and let that ego die. And in my case, the ego death made me think that I was actually dying, physically dying.
So the ego death is a common part of the psychosis.
Yeah, it's a complex topic. Yeah. The hero's journey, even in Joseph Campbell's book, The Hero's Journey, when we're going through daily life, we go through difficult times, and then sometimes we just change. We radically change, and the sort of hero's adventure is one of those things. And I think a famous example that a lot of your listeners would be aware of is the story of like the bad boy who turns good, the guy who's causing all kinds of problems in high school, but then he meets the right woman and she straightens him out and he becomes real conservative and he starts going to church every week and he becomes a good citizen and people go, wow, what happened to him? Well, he had an ego death, he had an ego death. Just took some time, that's all.
Or at least a partial ego death.
Yeah, because then it's more complex than to get on the show, but you're always going to have, if you're functioning in daily life, you've got an ego there. It's just that the ego you had sort of goes down or broadens or thins out a little bit. Maybe that's the best way to put it.
Or comes into compliance with the soul of the real you, the spirit man.
Comes into more compliance, yeah. Comes into definitely, it creates more room for you to be you. We'll say that.
Or at least the real you, not the...
the real you. One thing I've called bipolar disorder in one of my videos, I call it I can't be me disorder, because people feel like they can't be themselves. So who is the I and who is the me? Like, I can't be me. Well, the I is your ego. This is the image that you feel like you need to present to society. But the me is like your soul. I can't be me. I can't be who I really want to be. And somehow you need to find the courage to do that.
I've never really looked at it that way. That's very interesting.
Thank you.
One of the things I wanted to, mention, because we've been out here for about 54 minutes, is there anything you'd like to cover that I haven't thought to bring up?
Oh, I think we've covered quite a lot here, Royce, don't you think? I'm in good shape.
Okay. Well, I want to remind everybody once again that you can purchase his book at Amazon, and he's got a link on it on his website as well, www.bipolarorwakingup.com. He's got a YouTube channel, Bipolar or Waking Up, one single word. He's got some great videos. They're very educational. And I think the book's pretty interesting from what I've read of it so far. Hopefully I can have him back after I finish. In fact, Sean's already agreed to come back with Seth and one of Seth's patients so we can discuss this from both the patient's perspective and the psychologist's perspective. And I'm really looking forward to that. And Seth, I'll be in touch with both of y'all with a new date. I guess if we've already covered everything, we can go ahead and call this show a wrap, as my wife's due to come home any minute anyway from church. And give me some time to spend with her before we go to bed. Wednesday nights is usually Criminal Minds night for us.
All right.
Sunday nights is usually Columbo.
Yeah, and by the way, just in case your listeners forget, my name's Sean Blackwell. Okay?
What did I just say?
Well, you were talking about me and Seth, and then I think you called me Seth, but that's okay.
Oh, God.
But that's cool. That's cool. No, and we haven't mentioned my name, so I should put it out there one more time. But most of the stuff you'll see online is Bipolar, Waking Up. I tend to keep a lower profile online.
Right, and that is Sean Blackwell, and the other guy is Seth Barber. And folks, y'all watch out for me, because sometimes my mind just goes and I lose my place. So, and Sean, you're going to have to kind of learn to get used to that with me.
Yeah, that's okay, man. I appreciate it.
But I usually try to be a good sport when somebody catches me, because, you know, I realize that sometimes I let my mouth get ahead of my mind.
That's all right.
Which is like, I guess I still got a little bit of hyperactivity in me.
Well, you know, maybe one day I'll come back and we can talk about your ADD based on what I learned. You've told me a few things, and I might have some insight that could be interesting for your listeners.
Oh, cool. Well, we can sure enough do that. That sounds like it'd be very interesting. Maybe there's something in that even I didn't know, and I was it.
Yeah, maybe. We'll see.
All right. Well, Seth, I want to thank you for coming back.
You did it again.
Sir? Oh, did you? Okay.
Seth.
God, Sean, I want to thank you for calling.
All right.
I'm not having a good night. But I want to thank you for coming back. And I want to thank you for your understanding. You've been a fantastic guest. I want to thank all the listeners. If you don't do nothing but listen, that's still participating. Couldn't have a show without my listeners any more than I could without my guests. I'm going to go ahead and call it quits, folks, before I stick my foot in my mouth any further and start gagging on it. And
okay.
Sean, we will be in touch, and thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Royce.
Bye-bye.
All right.